Aloha, my name is Shelby Morrison, and I am the Programs and Communications Coordinator at ikahi Mediation Center. Welcome to our Finding Solutions Growing Peace Brown Bag Lunch series. Ikahi is a nonprofit community mediation center serving East Hawaii. We were founded in 1983 as a program of the island of Hawaii's YMCA, and in 2006, we became our own independent nonprofit. We empower people to come together, to talk and to listen, to explore options, and to find their own best solutions. To achieve this mission, we offer mediation, facilitation, and trainings just like this one to strengthen the ability of diverse individuals and groups to resolve interpersonal conflicts and community issues. Our Brown Bag Lunch series is held every third Thursday at 12 noon here on Zoom. You have to register on Eventbrite each time to receive that Zoom link. Coming up, we do have a few exciting events. So as a reminder, our next Brown Bag will be on May 21st, and this is with human resource consultant Robin Paggi, and her talk is titled Anger Introspection. Is your anger working for you? And you can register for that on Eventbrite. The link will be in the chat. In addition, our conflict prevention and resolution training series will be having another session on May 7th with yours truly, Shelby K. Morrison, and my workshop for women is titled Her Voice, Her Power, Reclaiming Personal Sovereignty in Conflict. The investment is $50 with group discounts and needs-based scholarships available. There's also an early bird discount if you register before April 23rd. It will be held at the University of Hilo, room UCB 127 from 8:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. And you can register for that at the link that will also be in the chat. At the end of today's talk, we will ask you to fill out a short online survey, which helps with our grant funding for this free series. So when I put the survey link in the chat at the end of the talk, please just take a moment or two to give us your thoughts. I'll also be sending out this link in an email that will go out tomorrow, as well as the video link for the recording. So without further ado, let me introduce our topic, Beyond Mediation, Emotional Intelligence Skills for Sustainable Resolution. And our speaker is Ms. Sabra Della Lucia, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist and professional mediator based in Hawaii. She is the founder of Collective Solutions, LLC, and the developer of a therapeutic mediation model that integrates emotional intelligence, relational systems, and conflict resolution. Lucia works with individuals, families, and professionals navigating high conflict situations with a focus on sustainable outcomes and ongoing relationship functioning. Take it away, Sabra.
Thank you so much, Shelby. I just want to thank ikahi Mediation Center for having me as part of your series. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get us started with the presentation, which will be essentially a slideshow. And I believe that this will be sent out to folks after the presentation for you to have on hand. I will be having some time after to answer any questions or talk story about what you've seen, but please feel free to reach out to me as well directly. Just a moment here. Here we go. Okay. Does that look okay, Shelby?
Looks great.
Okay, perfect. So beyond mediation, we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence skills for sustainable resolution. My background is as a mediator, as well as a licensed marriage and family therapist, as Shelby shared. So my biggest interest is creating a way for us to move through conflict in our most intimate relationships, even if those relationships are not super close. So I'm thinking relationships like a business partner or a co-parenting situation in which ongoing relationship health and functioning is of utmost importance. And therefore, we need to be able to move through conflict successfully. My experience is that most people don't struggle through conflict because they don't care. They struggle through conflict because they care deeply, yet they don't have the skills that might be necessary to move through conflict confidently. When I think about mediation, I'm not just thinking about the agreements and the outcomes and how can we find resolution, although that's a very important part of a mediation. But my focus has really been on sustainable resolution, which is a nice little trifecta of relational, emotional, and behavioral elements of the communication process through conflict. I'm going to ask us to do a quick reflection and a moment to ground ourselves and just enter us into the space. I know many of you might be joining on your lunch hour, so if you're walking or eating or what have you, do your thing, but I'll offer you to join us for a mindful moment. And what I want you to use this moment to consider, preparing us for today's chat, is thinking of a conflict that either keeps repeating itself or has never felt fully resolved. This could be something very personal to you, so I don't need you to share it in the chat, although you can if you'd prefer. This might be a conflict that you've witnessed, maybe in your life, family members, other professionals. It might be some of the larger conflicts that we're seeing today in our world. But a conflict that either keeps repeating or is never fully resolved. And within that, considering the relational elements, the emotional elements, and the behavioral elements of that conflict. And because this might be something that's really near and dear to somebody's heart, I'm just going to give you a moment to breathe through and ground yourself with that information and acknowledgement. Go ahead and take a deep breath through the nose. Just a quick release. I find that grounding exercises, when we're even just thinking and considering deep conflict in our lives, are incredibly important to regulate our nervous system. We're going to talk more about that in detail, but I wanted to give you a little example of what we'll be hitting on today. Okay. So just to prepare you for the talk and what you can expect to see, and maybe some of you might have to leave early, so I'll just kind of outline what we're going to get to today. But we're going to talk a little bit about the limitations of traditional mediation, and I'm going to add to what I believe is valuable from a therapeutic mediation approach. We're going to talk a little bit about what might drive conflict from an emotional and behavioral perspective within a mediation or an interaction. We'll talk briefly about the capacities of therapeutic mediation, although this talk today is really focused on emotional intelligence skills, but I want to introduce it and then I'll give you some links and resources to talk more about it. We'll move through some examples, and then really the bulk will be, I have 4 skills that I want to introduce to you folks today. You'll be sort of rating yourself and what you think these skills are. We'll move through them and then re-rating yourself to see, okay, now that I know what that emotional intelligence skill really is, how do I feel I rank on that, and how can I improve? We'll have a little bit of experiential practice, and integration and closing is really just kind of a question and answer and an open forum around the content that I've shared. Okay. My ask is that you think of yourself not just as a mediator, because I am under the impression that there probably are a lot of mediators with us today, and thank you all so much for your work because it's such an important profession and practice. So if that is your background, also thinking about your role as a participant in conflict over the course of your life. None of us are without conflict in our lives, and many or most of us perhaps would benefit from skills to move through it better. So I'll ask you to take that into consideration as we move through today. Okay. So kind of as a summary, I suppose, traditional mediation approaches up to this point, there's been so much work done. And many of you, I'm seeing some faces that I recognize here on Zoom, have been pioneers, certainly in the space of mediation here in Hawaii. So I just want to honor that work and how relevant it's been and how transformative it's been for our community. So thank you all for that. And certainly as a professional myself, how informational and powerful it's been to me as well, and kind of guided me on my journey as a mediator. So the approaches that we're used to seeing, facilitative approach to mediation, where we're really allowing the parties to facilitate their dialogue and we're kind of there witnessing it. Evaluative is, as mediators, we're coming in with a little more information or expertise on certain areas, helping to evaluate the actual content. And then transformative, which is when we're really kind of looking to have a large impact. And I would say that's kind of closest to the therapeutic mediation approach. Having this big impact on participants or parties. These are all beautiful approaches to mediation. Certainly each of them have their own space. All of the approaches are also looking towards agreement. While there's a lot of value in the mediation itself and getting people to be able to communicate their needs and through the conflict, we are looking towards an agreement, hopefully. And we're searching for a resolution on key topics or content in which folks are coming to the mediation with. We're focused on outcomes that work for the participants to move forward, which is fabulous. Even if we don't get there, hopefully that it's moving them forward in some way. But we're not always extending to relational patterns, right? I am well aware that as a therapist, that's something that I'm attending to very much in my therapy practice. But as a mediator, what I've noticed over the years of working with different mediators is there's relational patterns that aren't being attended to. And that's really where I feel this training is helpful, and kind of my basis for a therapeutic mediation approach. Okay, so what I would say the addition as a therapeutic mediation approach has to offer is helping the participants, or again, if you're thinking of yourself as a participant, emotionally regulate. This happens prior to the session, in planning and preparation. This happens during the session. We're going to get into some of those skills. And then we're also doing that regulation post-session. So a lot of attendance to the emotional reactivity, responses, and experience of those in conflict. We're looking to identify the relational patterns that got us here. Most conflict is not coming out of nowhere, right? There are patterns of a relationship or an experience that has moved us to the place in which we're at. And so we want to understand what those are. And if we don't, we're likely to persist. We're very, as humans, our behavioral change is quite hard. That's why I have a job as a therapist. And those behavioral patterns are very likely to persist if there isn't some sort of intervention. So with a therapeutic mediation approach, there's an opportunity to intervene. And so with a therapeutic mediation approach, the hope is that we would be allowed to understand the internal experiences that are driving behaviors and choices of the participants, or if you are a participant, of yourself and the other party. Again, we're going to get into some of those skills. But in terms of seeking resolution, just like all the other approaches, we'd love to see an agreement or a resolution. But we're not just looking at the specific content. We're really looking at what is the resolution that is going to be lasting based on how folks were able to create relationship rapport and trust in the conflict itself. Okay. So the more that we can create rapport in the relationship by understanding the patterns and addressing them, that relationship can be the strength that moves people forward into agreement, not just in the content of that specific seating or mediation, but also like longer term. In these relationships that I'm discussing, that we find ourselves in conflict with, they're ongoing. It's not just a one-time thing, right? It's not something perhaps like a landlord-tenant dispute in which that person's going to move out and they'll never see each other again. It would be a landlord-tenant dispute in which maybe they are co-owning cohabitating really closely together, and they have to maintain the relationship, right? So that's really what we're talking about. So that rapport becomes very important. Okay, so we can reach agreements and still leave in the same pattern that created the conflict. That's what we want to address. Although an agreement may even have been reached within that mediation, the patterns that have created the conflict might persist, and that's what we want to address. So we also want to create a flow between the existing mediation styles. So therapeutic mediation is not necessarily like something that you would do standalone. It's very much intertwinement of facilitative, evaluative, and transformative. And you're able, hopefully as a mediator, to kind of flow through that. Again, that's sort of a different conversation on how that takes place. But addressing the emotional experience and interrelational elements of parties or participants, or us, in some cases, ourself as a mediator. So again, as we go through the skills, I'll ask you to think about where some of these skills would be relevant to you as self, because we become dysregulated in our mediations. Content's hard. People can be really challenging. And so we need to know how to regulate ourselves. I'm going to go over 4 of the major kind of principles I've identified for therapeutic mediation. Really, in summary, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I will go ahead and put in the chat at the end because I don't see it on my screen and I don't want to lose my format. So at the end, and it'll be sent out with the slides as well, I have a couple of links. One is for a conversation that I did on therapeutic mediation approach with Jose Barzolo, who facilitated it. That's on YouTube. You can watch that. It's just an hour long. And then Conflict Resolution Alliance has a learning hour, and we'll be doing another talk specifically on therapeutic mediation. That's on Tuesday, May 19th at 12 o'clock. So you can sign up for that on Eventbrite. And to be honest, I don't know if there's a cost for non-CRA members, but you can check it out. I'll include that in the chat later. All right, so kind of briefly, 4 principles that are really important are, first and foremost, relational preservation. How do we preserve the relationship? Because it will need to continue. So we're highlighting the relationship itself as the strongest tool for mediation. The best way we can move forward with something is when we really want it to work out with the person that we're in conflict with. So that's our strongest tool. And echoing the importance thereof. Emotional intelligence, what we're going to focus on today. I think of this largely as building skills that allow us to bridge our inner experience when we're in conflict to those around us. Coming back to this concept of emotional and behavioral, like what is happening for me right now, and how can I share it with you in a meaningful way so that you're able to take perspective on a situation or where I'm at in a situation. That can help us with co-regulation, can bring down the tone a bit so we can move through the content. Narrative reframing. This is kind of like a very, I would say it's the hardest skill or part of therapeutic mediation, because in narrative reframing, we're needing to really step out of our own experience and understand the narrative that may be preventative of taking perspective of the other side. That is easier to do as a mediator because you're not involved in the content, right? So you can kind of understand like, oh, this person has a narrative of what the other party might be thinking, wanting, needing, because you're not involved in the content. But as somebody in conflict, right, as a participant in conflict, it can be really hard to step out because we're oftentimes in protection of what we want or need in relationships. So it can be a very challenging skill, but very important to ask for a reframing or of it. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Okay, and then the last one here is building conflict resilience. So I think about this as conflict education. We're really setting realistic expectations for the participants, things like consideration of a follow-up appointment, homework that might need to take place, the importance of accountability for holding to the mediation agreement, or even a preliminary agreement, particularly when it's not court involved, when we're not asking them to submit it to court and then the court's going to hold them accountable. Yeah, okay. So the emotional process, I want to walk us through, and those of us that are seasoned mediators, well, I'm not going to call myself a seasoned mediator, but those of you who are seasoned mediators are probably well aware of how this process plays out as you are observing in a mediation or helping to facilitate. So I want to break it down. We have a trigger, right? Somebody says something that sparks an emotion. Sometimes we're aware of these triggers, sometimes we are not. Trigger, in therapy, we're talking about triggers to trauma and different things like that. So I like to call it in this space, like it holds a charge. It's like when a battery sits on a charger for a long time, you might touch and it's, ooh, it's hot. So it's been kind of like juiced up in this event or word or experience or memory pops up, and it sort of puts us in this state of fight or flight. So our nervous system becomes dysregulated. When that happens, we place meaning on that thing. We have an emotional response, and we might not be aware of it, and the other party certainly might not be aware of it. So we've created meaning. There's an emotional, sorry, just a moment. Yeah. Okay, so when the emotional response takes place, I wrote emotional response, but oftentimes what it's seen as a reaction, right? It happens quick and it's not well thought through. And so it can really blow up a mediation, but also it can trigger the other party. So when these reactions are taking place, we aren't, if you're the one that's triggered and has the reaction, you might not be aware of what's going on. So we want to, we're going to get into that when we get into the skills, is as a participant being aware of what's happening for you and being able to communicate that to the party or the group. As mediators, being able to notice that this has taken place so that we can respond accordingly. But what happens once we have that emotional response is, right, that place of fight or flight, we go into a more protective behavior. We believe that the behavior we're engaged in is protecting us from a threat, a real or perceived threat. It might be a threat that you've created in your head through your trigger and the meaning that you've attributed to that. And that protective behavior can look very differently. It can be yelling. It can be complete withdrawal. It can be an emotional response. So many things can be happening. It just depends on how that individual believes they need to respond to protect themselves. And then there's relational impact of the series of unintentional events, both on the relationship and the patterns, as well as any potential ability to move forward within the conflict itself. So this can vary in severity, as I was saying earlier. It can sort of end a mediation right there, dead in its tracks. Or it can really burst the rapport of the relationship. This person does no longer trusts that the other party is going to follow through, that they have good intentions on moving through the conflict, etc. So it can be really dangerous when the relational impact takes place. That's kind of a lot. So I'm going to walk us through an example of that. All right, so we have a 32-year-old man, Kai. He's been helping care for his aging father. That should say mother. Sorry, mother. He feels like the responsibility has mostly fallen on him, while his older brother lives on another island and is less involved with the care of mother. During a family conversation, Kai says with frustration, "Oh, I feel like I'm doing this all alone." And his mother quickly responds, "That's not true. Your brother helps when he can. You're being unfair." So Kai shuts down. He becomes quiet. and he later withdraws from coordinating care altogether. The tension grows and communication becomes strained over time. And I'm sure situations like this, many of us can relate to, right? In our own families or communities. So what is the emotional process? I wish I could see the chat because I would love to hear from you. So I'll just ask you folks if you want to participate to participate there. But we have, first is the trigger. The trigger is the mother's response. It feels dismissive to Kai, right? He's saying it feels like I'm doing everything, and she's saying, no, you're not. Your brother's helping. So while she might not have intended to be dismissive, for him, he's triggered. That feels dismissive. You're saying I do nothing. Then we have what meaning has been attributed. I'm gonna have you folks look at both sides, right? Not just Kai's, but mom's. So Kai might be thinking, wow, I don't even matter. Everything I've been doing up to this point doesn't even seem like it's helpful. Mom might be feeling like, whoa, I'm getting blamed. Kai's triggered, right? The emotional response of that interaction, Kai, of course, is feeling hurt or frustrated, and mom might be feeling defensive. She might be feeling anxious. The protective behavior, right? Real or perceived, nothing is actually hurting anybody, but we believe we're being attacked, for example. So Kai withdraws. You know what? I need to protect myself. I've been putting all this time into mom. Nobody seems to care. It doesn't seem to matter. I'm withdrawing from the situation. For mom, she's minimizing, right? In order to protect herself and probably the relationship of her kiddos, she's like minimizing everybody's experience. The relational impact overall, what's going to happen? Less communication, increased resentment. In this situation or vignette, care coordination might break down, which is pretty serious when we're talking about kupuna care across islands, etc. And in most of the examples that I have for the mediations that I do, the relational impact of increased resentment and care coordination, if that breaks down, it's very severe because it usually involves people that are most vulnerable, kupuna, children, etc. Okay, so that's kind of a process that takes place that we're addressing. So what we react to isn't just what's happening, it's what we're making it mean. We as humans, the brain is a wild thing. It's doing all kinds of things without our awareness. I think the statistic is we use about 10% of our brain on conscious activity. The rest is subconscious. A lot of these things are not happening on a very conscious level, which is why we have the emotional intelligence skills to build so that we can bring it to the conscious. So what that can look like is the reaction that's being displayed or experienced. Let's say you're the person in conflict, the reaction that you are displaying, it might not be in proportion to the actual experience. It's in proportion to the meaning that we're making of it. In Kai's example, he's made meaning. Wow, I'm being minimized here. They're not valuing what I've done. He made that meaning. Mom did not say that. So you can see that without awareness, this meaning can hold a lot of power, but in reality, it holds a truth for the person experiencing it. As we go through the skills, we'll start that on the next slide. What I want you folks, because I want you to be able to take these skills with you. So if you are somewhere where you can write this down, I want you to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 on each emotional intelligence skill. Okay. I'm going to introduce the skill name. So for example, the first one is self-awareness. Before I even describe the skill, I want you to rate yourself first, okay? 10 is excellent, 1 is I don't even know what that skill is. And then we're gonna, right after I explain what that skill is, I want you to re-rate yourself with the knowledge of, okay, what does that actually mean though? Because we have a lot of these words that we believe we understand meaning in, or they take on different contexts. And then we'll rate yourself again, and we'll do something with that at the end. So a bit of a self-assessment. Self-awareness, probably the skill that people overestimate in themselves the most, especially in the therapeutic space. But what is self-awareness? It's the ability to track your internal state in real time. The stimuli or this thing happens in front of you. I understand what's happening for me in response to that. That's self-awareness. We can recognize our personal patterns that take place with that self-awareness. Okay? Because at the end of the day, we cannot shift what we're not aware of. So that's why this is an incredibly important skill. If we're not aware of it, we can't shift it. And whatever that lack of shift experience is becomes our truth. Surfing's a really great example. So I'm a surfer, and I found myself really with a fear of duck diving. Okay. So going under the waves and not getting pummeled. I can surf, but when it comes to duck diving, I had believed that I couldn't hold my breath. I couldn't make it through. I started to realize that actually that was in my head. I don't know how that got in my head, but it became my truth. I'm really bad at this. Once I became aware of that, a part of my internal experience and not an actual reality, I started reality testing myself. I go, hold on, let me see if I can do it. Let me see if I can go out in bigger waves. And I started to realize that was actually something that I created as a truth for myself that wasn't necessarily true. Okay. So my internal experience was a lot of anxiety. My external experience didn't really match that. I was just fine in the waves. I was just fine duck diving waves. So I wanted to connect that. Okay, obviously that's not a conflict example, but it's a real life example. So we benefit from self-awareness through that congruence of our internal and external experience. As mediators, we can provide real-time feedback to our participants, helping to build their self-awareness. This is a beautiful art and skill that many of you as mediators have. I know it because I've seen it in action. An example. Hey, I noticed your body language changed with that idea that was presented. What's happening there? What's happening for you? So we're inviting people to provide more information with the awareness that we're presenting in front of them so that they can build awareness in self. Oh, I didn't know my body language changed. I guess I'm feeling uncomfortable with that idea, right? We're helping them to build that self-awareness. Okay, so with the description of what that skill is, go ahead and re-rate yourself. Okay, wait. Am I a 10? The next skill is self-regulation. We're trying to create space between our feeling and our action. It's the difference between a reaction versus a response. We want to interrupt through self-regulation an automatic protective response because we're all in protection of self at the end of the day. So we want, which is a great thing, right? We are wired that way. That is the way we protect ourselves from a very biological standpoint. However, we know that to date, we're all sort of overstimulated, easily triggered. There's a lot going on in the world that has many of us very sensitive to what's happening. But we still don't want that automatic protective response unless we're actually getting chased by a lion in the wild. We don't need to be operating like that today. But we also don't want to suppress the experience. I don't want to have a response and be like, no, 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 you're not feeling that. I want to be able to make an intentional choice and an expression around that choice. Oh, no, I am feeling very worried about where my children will be going to school. But I want to make an intentional choice around how that's expressed to my community board or my partner. And in order to create space for that regulation, we can use the skills such as the moment to pause or intentional thought, a deep breathing exercise, which I always advocate for because our breath is the only thing that we truly always have with us. And if you don't have it with you, you're in a different world of problems. But in a mediation, we might be actually, or a conflict, we might be asking for a physical break from the dialogue, right? We might need to ask to step away to create that space. As mediators, we can also host that for folks. Hey, why don't we take a pause, have a bathroom break, have some water, coffee, okay? But then also reporting, we'll be back. Because when we flight as an expression, that can cause a lot of problems for the relational movement as well. So the mindful moment is always encouraged to tap back into the present moment. And it's a useful skill all around. So that's self-regulation. I'll ask you to re-rate yourself, hearing a little bit more about what that skill is. The third skill I want to offer us today is other awareness. This one can be quite challenging, especially when we're in conflict. Again, we're looking to have our needs met. But the most effective way to have our needs met is to understand the needs of everybody. And when we're in a place of judgment, which is a very natural place for the brain to go, it creates shortcuts. It is a protective measure. So we need to consciously move out of that judgment into curiosity. We want to be able to understand the function of the behavior that we're witnessing. So somebody is presenting with a behavior. What might the function of that behavior be? This takes a lot of practice, particularly as a participant of the conflict. Again, as mediators, we're third party, so it's easier to notice, oh, that person is now yelling because they feel in protection of their retirement plan. Let's say it's a divorce mediation, right? But as a participant of the conflict, that can be harder to see. Well, they're just being greedy. They just don't want me to have any part of their retirement, right? So we need to be able to depersonalize the experience that we're having in response and observe the behavior that we're noticing with an objective perspective. Sort of a high level emotional intelligence skill through conflict. Because why is this so important? The behavior makes sense when we understand what it's protecting. Okay. Oh, your retirement plan is so that the kids can go to college. I can understand that. I can understand why you'd be so protective of that. So again, seasoned mediators will likely pick up on this right away. It's part of our training. Harder part is how can we ask participants to move from self-needs and self-preservation into the shared needs or interests of the parties? Oftentimes this is done by asking them to refocus on children, family stability, household safety, etc. So this kind of falls under the narrative reframing, right? We're like depersonalizing, it's not an attack on us. We're moving into how can I understand the function of this behavior? I can't tell you as somebody who's in the conflict how valuable this skill is. Because when you can stop and understand what's happening and depersonalize it as an attack on you, you can get really curious about what is happening for that person. Then they're going to feel heard and seen. And that relationship rapport that's built is like gold to move forward in the mediation with. Or conflict. Okay. And the last one we're going to cover today is relational movement. Very small, very intentional shifts that can change interaction patterns for those that are in relationship. An example is naming the impact. You're yelling at me right now and it's really making me feel like you don't want to be here. You don't trust me. Okay, so I'm pulling in a part of our relationship by naming its impact. A softening approach is kind of bringing down our tone, our volume, trying to use words that are objective versus subjective, kind of softening the interaction, coming back to the tenderness of what these relationships tend to be. It's a very tender, close, or at one time close relationship that holds a lot of meaning for people. Going back to the quote I offered at the beginning of today's session, it's because we deeply care that we're here. Okay, so that softening approach can be really impactful. Staying engaged without escalating. Escalation is that fight or flight response. But being able to really stay engaged through conflict, you can take a break, you can take a pause, letting people know that you're going to come back. But I'm engaged, I'm here, I want to be here, I'm scheduled to be here in some cases. This is where insight can really drive change. For me, I love highlighting to clients their own ability to move into agreement by feeling safe and seen, and how that can drive further commitment. Two ways. Drives further commitment to the agreement itself, right? Whatever that content piece is. But from my perspective, even more importantly, in these close relationships that are ongoing, is it builds trust in the ability to move through conflict with one another in the future. Okay, so if I believe you are engaged, if I believe you and I can objectively move through conflict, if I believe that I'm going to be safe and seen, then I know that I can bring things up. I know we can be successful at getting through hard things again. Okay. And again, I'll ask you to re-rate yourself on the relational movement. Okay. I'm just going to read through these quickly because I think they're worth noting. Sustainable resolution isn't just about solving the issue. It's about shifting the way we engage with conflict itself. So content is very important. Agreement and solutions are very important. But from a therapeutic mediation approach, it's about shifting the way we engage with conflict itself through our own skills. Because conflict doesn't improve necessarily with better arguments. It improves with greater awareness, regulation, and relational intention. Relational intention, another way to think about that term is prioritization of the relationship and not necessarily the content. Okay. So we'll move through an experiential practice, moving from protection to curiosity. I had mentioned earlier, this can be a really challenging skill. Let's see here. I want you to think about a conflict that you were a part of that was a challenge for you. Not as a mediator, as a participant, a conflict that you've had. And I want that to be a conflict that led to a lot of protection and emotions on your end. The belief, real or perceived, that you need to protect yourself. And there's a lot of emotion behind it. And I want you to see if you can identify what a reactive thought might have been. And then we're going to translate it. Very, very simple, not very, very easy. But the idea is to shift the thought into a thought of curiosity, an actual question to the other party. So an example, I can't believe you care so much about money, would be a reaction, right? You're creating meaning on somebody's behavior. Rather, moving into a place of curiosity. Can you help me understand what feels most important to you here? So we're asking them to be accountable versus making that assumption and getting into that place of protection. Another example is, he doesn't care at all. I'm out of here. I don't even know why I'm in this conflict. Hold on, right? The relational movement is, I notice I'm becoming really reactive. Can we slow this down? So I'm sharing with the other parties, the impact this conversation is having on me. I'm taking ownership of that impact. Can we slow this down? I'm bridging my internal world to the group so we can have the relational movement together. So I'll ask you to write that reactive thought and change it into a thought of curiosity or something more objective. Again, incredibly powerful tool, incredibly challenging tool when you're the one in conflict. Okay, and the last consideration, two things I want you to consider. When you thought about that conflict that's ongoing at the very beginning of today's session, let me ask that question again. A conflict that either keeps repeating or is never fully resolved in your life. What is one way that you can move differently in your next moment of conflict or in that conflict? And moving through those 4 skills in your own rating after learning about each of what those skills are, is there a skill that you feel you could enhance that would create some sort of relational movement as a participant. And then of course, for those of us that are mediators, is there a skill that would help you refine your mediation skills in a way that would be impactful for participants for this concept of relational movement, adding it to your repertoire and skill set? So we do have about 10 to 13 minutes to do any Q&A, but I also just wanted to share my information so that you folks could reach out. So I do have a mediation practice, Collective Solutions, Mediation and Consulting. We are located here on Oahu in Kaimuki, but we also provide remote services across the islands. You're welcome to visit our website. And also, it's not listed here, but I do have therapy practice as well, located in Kaimuki, as well as across the islands for telehealth. If you're interested in more behavioral health stuff, I'd love to have conversations around any of this, feedback, questions, anything. So if you don't feel comfortable asking in the group today, please feel free to reach out to me. Email is best. Yeah, okay, I do have my email here. Good. And I just want to thank you all again for being here, and thank you, Kokahi, for having me. It was really fun to be able to share some of this content.
All right, we have a few minutes. If anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can raise your hand, or feel free to pop the question into the chat. So I'll ask a question. So if one party is trying, like assuming we're as a participant in the conflict and not a mediator, if one party is trying to practice self-awareness and trying to engage in that relational movement, how would you suggest that they encourage the other party to also participate in these things? Because it would seem difficult if one party is always doing the adjusting and like trying to be understanding and explaining, and the other party is just like very reactive. So how could we go about, as a participant in a conflict, trying to encourage that same reaction from the other party?
Okay, great question. I would say, as a participant of the other person in conflict, of a participant in conflict, with that other person is reactive to you, the relational movement would be to stay calm yet stay engaged. Right? You don't want to meet them where they're at. You want them to meet you where you're at. Easier said than done, obviously, but you might do things like suggest that this person, usually it's people that really know each other, right? So I've had co-parents that they're like, hey, do you want to go grab a coffee and come back? Why don't we take a break? So they're sort of like kindly offering a gesture in which they believe this person might need to calm down. I'm a huge proponent of modeled behavior. The more we model the behavior, it's really hard for a person to just stay up here when the model behavior remains down here. I mean, it is this person carrying the weight of staying down here because it's easy to be reactive, right? But eventually this person will start to come down. If they don't, quite frankly, they might not be prepared for this type of mediation. They might not, our readiness skills as mediators is really important as well. But you're asking about the participant. So it may be that the participant isn't quite ready to be in this space. From a therapeutic mediation approach, I do a lot of screening because it's not for every type of mediation. Certainly not court mandated when people actually are not ready to be there. I wouldn't want somebody to be vulnerable in that situation. The participant that you're describing, for example. Yeah, so those are some initial thoughts. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. No, that's great, because it's like I know that if someone's trying to take this information and use it in their personal life with any conflicts, especially because you mentioned like ongoing things, like a lot of us, maybe we have conflicts, but we just like put it back in the closet. Like it's just not something we talk about. So trying to reapproach it from this therapeutic standpoint and trying to make sure we're regulated and then yeah, seeing about how we can influence the other party who maybe doesn't have all this information. So, no, that really helped. I think modeling is, you're absolutely right, that modeling this behavior is probably the best way to go about doing it.
Yeah. Conflict resilience is really important. So some of us are more resilient to conflict than others. And there's a variety of reasons for that I won't get into. But what I will say is parties tend to know their other participants' reactivity. And so if it's a conflict that we're trying to manage on our own, I always encourage people to prep, right? Don't come hot into the kitchen and be like, I want to talk about the kids' soccer game and you yelling. Like, don't come in hot. Hey, I'd really like to talk to you about how we're managing the soccer team together. I'm wondering if you have time for that Sunday morning. Maybe I can make us some coffee and we could sit down and talk about that. So we're like creating resilience for that conflict because we're creating a safe space. Yeah, so that's another way to do it.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
I have I don't know if it's a question or a thought or just what you were just talking about modeling sort of prompted it. So I'm a mediator, and I, I had a mediation recently where there was, there was a very excitable party, for lack of a better description. And I think my calmness almost seemed to provoke him.
Mm. As a
That it
mediator.
was, as much as that usually serves as a very effective way of kind of creating a nice, good, productive environment for folks and kind of, I've, in looking back on it, I don't think I really recognized it in the moment, but looking back on it, I feel like he commented on it in our little pre-conversation before we were all together, that how calm I was. And it didn't seem to be a problem the way he commented on it, but it almost seemed like he was responding to that. So I'm just wondering if you've encountered that or how you feel about that in the context of everything you were talking about today.
Yeah. Um, if we're asking, like relationships are linear. So as a mediator, we have a relationship with each participant. Okay. So if there is something that I notice, and because I'm doing mediations on my own as a female, whereas at Mediation Center of the Pacific, where I also volunteer, there's a male and a female. It's a really great way to do mediation because people can feel that there's a bias or there can be a reactivity with just having one gender. Could be other things too, of course, but like let's use that as an example. Um, I like to do that opportunity for breakout sessions and not in front of the other party because I don't want to create more conflict, of course. But what I want to do is provide that feedback to them of what I'm noticing and offering an invitation to them to bridge their internal world back to me. Okay. So, hey, I noticed that you seem to be reactive to something about me. Is there anything that you're noticing that you could share with me so that I can understand how to best facilitate? Or is there something I'm doing that is uncomfortable for you? Let me know so we can work through that together. So I'm asking them to be accountable for their reactivity and to bridge their internal world so that I can help. Sometimes a common response to that might be, yeah, I feel like you're being really biased. Okay, cool. I want to interject some more objective language. I appreciate that feedback. I'm going to do my best to demonstrate my lack of bias in this situation because that's really not what I'm here for, right? And if there's something that you notice, let's take a pause like this again and you let me know. So I'm also like giving them the autonomy to bring it back up. So it's not just wrapped up in their behaviors without their awareness, because oftentimes it is without people's awareness. So when you give them that opportunity to share and walk through it, they can create awareness around it and understand the meaning that they've attached.
Yes, I would like to. I'm a mediator myself, and I have done several mediation, and it is important to, when you have a person who is emotional and is upset or increasing the tension in during the conversation or during the mediation, it is important to acknowledge them I think it is more important to acknowledge that person that's emotional, like in the do I acknowledge her emotion and his understanding the situation that brought him to mediation. Obviously, that's the reason why they are there, and to acknowledge each other's emotion. And then at that time, once you acknowledge, and if you take them to a break room and try to dig a little more into what is the situation, because sometimes one person is just by presence is coercing the other one, and that trigger that emotion. That's what is important to personally. I like to do it via Zoom because they can be in their own environment and feel more comfortable than being in a room with everybody together and walking in and walking out and things like that. So that to me is more important to acknowledge that both of them. I understand that this is emotional for you. Why don't we separate in rooms and then dig into each of them? What is that? Because the person that's showing emotion, it could be manipulating the situation. So it is important to understand the activity they are using the emotion and separate it, and so that you can learn more who is who and what is doing what, and how you can bring the tension down, and try to work that situation that way. That's usually what I do, and I wanted to share that because uh, when you if you don't acknowledge them, they get upset. They get very upset. So it is important to acknowledge them, let them know I understand. And why don't we work a little more and we go separate room so that I can de-escalate the conversation and understand each of you independently. That's what that's one of the tools that I use to. So I just want to share that.
Thank you, Fernando. Yeah, I totally agree. And usually I'm in my physical office space. Today I'm in my home office. But one thing that I love about my physical space, which doubles as my therapy office, is it's big, it's bright. People can get up, walk around, grab coffee. It's and then when people need space, it's an actual outside lanai, which I love because I feel that when I'm upset, I feel very confined, right? I want to be out. I need expansiveness. I need space. I would prefer to see the ocean, which is available there. So just a little highlight around when we're doing these therapeutic practices, how important space can be, in addition to what you shared and that concern for potential cohesion. So I appreciate that. I do just want to be conscious of time. So maybe Shelby, I'll ask you if we need to end or if we can continue with any other questions or comments.
Yeah, if there's any other questions, anyone who has one, feel free to unmute yourself and we'll give it one more minute or so. If no one has any, we'll close. Sabra, if you want to pop your email into the chat. Perfect. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for coming today. As a reminder, please just take a few minutes to fill out our short online survey, which helps with our grant funding for this free series. You can find the survey link in the chat. And be sure to also check your emails in the coming days for the video link recording if you want to rewatch everything, as well as that survey link once more. So mahalo, and we'll see you all next month.